Okay, this video is meant as a, a refresher of some old skills that you learned previously, perhaps in 6th grade math, perhaps in elementary school, how to convert between percents and decimals or percents and fractions going in both directions. So if you're really good at this skill, just take a quick skim to make sure you understand how to do it, because this is one of the prerequisite things you need to be able to do if you're going to use each of the skills that we're going to do in this chapter. On percents. All right, so we're going to start with converting between percents to decimals, and then we'll do decimals to percents. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to start by just giving you the general rule for each of them. If you're going from a percent to a decimal, you're going to move 2 decimal places to the left. In other words, you're moving in the direction that will make it smaller when you're going from percent to decimal. Now, if you're going decimal to percent, you do the opposite. You go 2 decimal places to the right. So what these have in common is that they both move 2 decimal places only. That's all you ever move. So keep that in mind. No matter how many digits you have or don't have, you only move 2 decimal places whenever you're converting from decimals to percents or percents to decimals. So let's do some examples. I'm gonna hit pause for a moment. I'm gonna write a few examples, and when you see them, you hit pause if you think you remember how to convert these, and you give it a shot. Okay, so if you think you already know how to convert each of these, go ahead and take a moment and hit pause and prove it. See if you can do them, or at least be able to say them out loud before I do them. So now the first one, 25%. What we're gonna do with that one is I'm gonna start by just writing it one more time, 25%. And you have to ask yourself, where's the decimal place currently? Well, it's 25, so there is no decimal being mentioned, which means it's at the end. So 25%, the decimal's at the end of it. Up here, we learn we're going from percent to decimal. We go 2 decimal places to the left. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to move 2 decimal places to the left. So you notice the decimal's in front of the 2 now. So that's going to equal 0.25. And that's going to be our decimal equivalent to 25%. So now let's see if you can try the next one if you haven't done so already. I'm just going to go ahead and write it and get ready. Decimals after the 8 already, because there's no mentioning of it, so that means that's where it is. So I'll convert that one. Go twice to the left. So that one's going to equal 0.98. And that's what that one's equivalent is as a decimal. Now I'll try the next one if you haven't done so already. Now if you look at this one, you'll notice we already have a decimal place. It's already located between the 2 and the 5. So the rule doesn't change though. From wherever the decimal already is, move 2 places to the left. 1, 2. And so that one equals 0.425. Sure, it's 3 digits long as a decimal, but it doesn't matter. We are following the rule. 2 decimal places to the left. Now the next one. If you haven't done so, try it. 6%. The decimal's already after it because it's just 6, no mentioning of a decimal. So we still move twice though. So you go once and then you go again. Now you'll notice we have a space right there where we had to move again, and there's nothing there. So you fill that space, kind of like when you're doing long division and you're having to annex zeros. It's pretty much just like that. We're going to put a 0 in that space. So it's 0. And now there's a space between the 6 and the decimal now. So it's 0.06. So that's going to be 6%. All right, let's try 100%. If we have 100%, and this is the same for also if you're doing anything over 100%, the decimal, if there's no mentioning of it, it's at the very end. So now move it twice. 1, that's supposed to be red. 1, 2. That didn't line up perfectly. That's supposed to be after the 1 is where that ends up. So after the 1, so that means that's 1.0 or just 1 or 1.00. They all mean the same thing. You can just say 1 if you want. And so that's that one. So now I'm going to hit pause and write a few more examples. Now take a moment to see if you can do these 2 additional ones that I just wrote. See if you can do them on your own. 143%. There's no mentioning of a decimal, so it's after the 3. So we know it starts after the 3. So from there, 2 decimal places to the left. So it ends up between the 1 and the 4. So that tells us that one's going to be 1.43. And that's what that decimal equivalent is going to be. Now, it can be worth more than 1. It could be 1 or higher. In this last one, it was 1, and this one's 1.43. Okay, so now the next one, give that one a shot. The decimal is currently between the 6 and the 3, so move 2 spaces to the left. And it goes between the 2 and the 5. So it's going to be 2.563. So 2.563. That's the decimal equivalent of 256.3%. And that's the decimal equivalent of that one. So these are some exercises of going from percents to decimals. So now we're going to do the opposite. Now we're going to practice going from decimals to percents. For this, though, we're not going to do quite as many examples because I think you get the idea of what happens if there's only, like for example, if you were told to move 0.06 into a decimal, into a percentage, you know that's going to become 6% because that first location, this location right here, that one is the tens percent, so 10%, 20%, 30%, and then the second one, that's the ones percent. And so that's kind of how we keep track of it. So I'm going to hit pause and write down a few examples for converting decimals to percentages. Let's go in the opposite order. All right, if you think you can do it in the opposite order, if you're going from decimals to percents, we said up here it's going to the right 2 decimal places, hit pause, see if you can convert each of these. See if you got the hang of it. So if I move 2 decimal places to the right, so you see where it currently is, now I gotta go to the right. So 1, 2, so it goes between the 8 and the 6. So that's gonna equal 348.6. That's 348.6%. Because remember, we were converting 2%. We're converting from decimal to percent towards the percent. So that's, gotta add the percent sign. Do not forget that. You don't just get to magically drop it. Now let's try the next one. Same deal though, from where the decimal is, move it twice. 1, 2. So between the last 0 and the 7. So that one becomes 0.75%. That's what that one becomes. So for this one, you notice our percentage was less than 1%, but it doesn't matter. Sure, it's a very small percentage, but it still does exist. So now go ahead and give this last one a shot if you haven't done so already. Move that decimal place 2 times to the right. 1, 2. All right, so if we move the decimal just twice, it ends up being after the 3. So that one's going to turn into 23%. So now this was, I tried to include an example of each scenario having more than 100%, less than 100%, all these examples of converting between decimals and percents. So just know, regardless of what it is, it does not matter. More than 100%, less than 100%, a decimal more than 1, a decimal really, really small, less than 1, like in this example. No matter what, the rule is, no matter how you convert, it's always 2 decimal places. So if it's going from a percentage to a decimal, it's 2 decimal places to the left. But if it's going the opposite, from a decimal to a percentage, like let's say your final answer, you're trying to turn it back into a percentage, you're going to go ahead and move it 2 decimal places to the right. Now, I point that out because one of the reasons why we want to do this, I should have said this before, is anytime you're going to do a calculation with a percentage, like if you're going to find a percent of a number, anytime that happens, you've got to turn it into a decimal first because you can't specifically tell some kind of computing a calculation that it's magically a percent. You have to make it a decimal first before you actually multiply it or divide it. It has to be a decimal. Or if the question said find the percent, if you calculate, you're actually going to find a decimal. You're going to have to be able to convert that final answer back to a percentage. And that's something we'll be doing a little bit later in chapter 6. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about how to convert between fractions and percents, and then percents to fractions. So this one's not going to quite take as long because it's going to use a skill that we already have. So I'm going to start by hitting pause and writing a few examples, and you give them a shot. All right, take a look at each of these examples and hit pause if you think you already know how to do it, or maybe watch the first one, then hit pause, see if you can do the others. But in order to convert a fraction to a decimal, to a percent, you're going to use the skills we learned back in chapter 2. You're going to first turn that fraction to a decimal, and then do what we did over here, at the just now, and turn that decimal answer into a percent. That's what we're going to do. So for the first one, 6 over 8, we learned way back in chapter 2 to turn that to a decimal, you would do 6 divided by 8. Now, at this point, I don't care if you use long division or whether you use a calculator. I just want to make sure you can do it. And so if you do 6 divided by 8, you're going to get 0.75 as your answer. And if you get 0.75 as your answer, we learned down here to turn a decimal into a percentage, we got to move 2 decimal places to the right. So take that answer, move 2 decimal places to the right, and so that's going to tell you it's going to end up being after the 5, so 75%. That's going to be your answer to that question. 75%. That's what 6 out of 8 is. It's 75%. Now, to hit pause if you think you understand that now, you want to try the other ones. So for the next one, this one's going to be 2 divided by 3. Well, let's see. 2 divided by 3. If you did it with a calculator or long division, you're going to get 0.66666. It repeats. It goes on forever. So you get lots of 6s. So what you're going to do is you're going to take that decimal and you're going to move it twice for that one. So it's in front of the 6. So you're going to move it twice. So now it's going to be after the second 6. So that tells you you're going to end up with 66.6666. Remember, those 6s repeat. You're going to end up with that many percent. But now, that's not a reasonable percent to use. Usually, if the question was asked you to convert this, or it would give you some indication of how to round. Otherwise, you'd be doing that, writing those forever. So if it said a round to the nearest tenth, the tenth is the first number after the decimal place. So this 6 tells you to round up on this 6. So if it said round to the nearest tenth, it would be 66.7. Or if it said round to the nearest hundredth, that means the second number after the decimal place, so you have to look at the third. This 6 tells you round this one up. So you would have 66.67% is how that one would turn out. So I'm going to go ahead and write the answer as if we were rounding to the hundredths. So 66.67%. Give the last one a shot. You haven't done so already. So 5 divided by 2, long division or calculator, doesn't really matter. 5 divided by 2, well, that's going to give you 2.5. So now you're going to take that answer, 2.5, and you're going to move the decimal place 2 spaces to the right, just like the others. So from there, go to the right. 1, 2. We had an empty space that popped up after the 5, so that means there's going to be a blank there. So that tells us 2, 5, and then we said there's going to be a 0 there because there's a blank there. 250%, and that's what that's going to equal, which implies that it's more than the whole. But if you take a look, 5 is a lot more than 2, so in fact it's more than 2 times 2, so that's what we were expecting, an answer to more than 200%. So that was a reasonable answer. Just like 6 was less than 8, so we were expecting an answer less than 100%, but more than half, so more than 50%. 2 is more than half of 3, but not all of 3, so it's not going to be 100%, but it's going to be more than half, and so kind of right in there is 66.67%. So that was converting from fractions to percentages. So now we're going to go in the other direction. We're going to go, well, what if you wanted to convert from a percentage to a fraction? You could do this if you had a question that said, what is, for example, if it said, what is 50% of a number, we can work with this. That's what we're going to do. So rather than, we're not worried about how to find those numbers, so right now we're talking about how to convert. That's what this video is covering, how to convert. So I'm going to hit pause and write down a couple examples, and then you try them out. All right, so we're going to finish up with these last 3 examples, and then we're going to stop at that point. That would be a full refresher how to convert any way that you need to. So our last example is converting from a percent to a fraction. Now, before I mention that, I want to make sure that I include, I didn't mention it earlier, but I'm going to go ahead and jump in now because we're going to need this definition now. The original definition of percent, means per cent, like for every cent. Cent is a prefix, it's a root word that means 100. So for every 100, or per 100, or out of 100. So however you want to think of that, per 100, out of 100, for every 100, whatever you need. That's what the word percent means. Literally, per is for every, cent is the prefix for 100. So for every 100, just so you know. So that's going to be the magic number that we're going to need to use for each of these examples. So if you think you already know how to turn them into fractions, press pause and see if you got this. Now, because each of them are out of 100, that's going to make this first one, the 50%, that's going to make that 50 out of 100. So we put it over 100, out of 100. And then your job is just to simplify that fraction and you're done. So that fraction, if you simplify top and bottom, 50 goes into top and bottom. So that fraction becomes 1 over 2. 50% is equivalent to half. Now, I know you probably knew that one. I chose an easy one to start off with, just to remember, show you when it's easy, so when it gets harder, you can still do it. So 50% is equal to half, that makes sense. 50% is half of 100. So a lot of these are kind of fast, they're kind of intuitive. So now 75%, that's 75 out of 100. Well, we got to simplify that fraction. 25 goes into top and bottom, so that fraction turns into 3 over 4. And that fraction does not simplify, so that's your answer. That's 75% as a fraction. So if you ever had a question where it said find 75% of the number, you can either do 0.75 times that number, or use your fraction skills, do 3 over 4 times that number, and you'll get the correct answer doing that. So now these both came out to pretty fractions, meaning they're not huge complicated fractions or smaller numbers, nothing too much of a headache. But sometimes that doesn't always happen. For example, let's look at this next one. It might not become a pretty fraction we're used to seeing. It's 82%. So that means it's 82 out of 100. So now if you're trying to simplify this, you might say, well, okay, what goes into 82 and goes into 100? I don't know about you guys, but it might not be obvious what goes into both. Now, I've already worked out this example, so I know what it is, but let's work under the premise we didn't know what goes into both. But that's okay. We're going to use our fraction skills, and if we have to simplify it more than once, so be it. We'll just keep simplifying until we're done. So in this example, they're both even numbers, so we know at least 2 goes into both of them. And so, okay, so 82 cut in half, well, that's going to be 41. And then 100 cut in half, that's going to be 50. And then we just have to find out, does 41 get any smaller? 41 over 50. And unfortunately, in this example, it doesn't, so I chose one where it didn't simplify any further. So it looks like we got it right the first time. But even if it could simplify further this step, just keep going. Keep simplifying until it does not go any further. Because once you've done that, you have mastered the skill of converting between percents and fractions. Alright guys, one last final note. This video was meant as a refresher. This was not all that 6-1B was all about. This just covered the old skill I want to make sure you guys can do, which is converting between any type of number into a percentage. So we covered going from a percent to a decimal, which was moving the decimal place 2 places to the left. We covered going from a decimal to a percent, which was going 2 decimal places to the right. That was the easy one, of just moving it over. We also figured out what to do when there was only 1 digit or there were more than 2 digits. It does not matter. We just realized if we have a blank spot for moving the decimal place, we just fill it with a 0. We also covered how to go from fractions to percents, where literally it was just what we learned in chapter 2 with dividing. Just do top number divided by bottom number, and then turn that decimal answer into a percent, and you're done. Even if that percent is going to be more than 100% like it was in this example. Then we talked about percents to fractions. So percent, the definition of, reminded us, was out of 100 or per 100 or for every 100. So put your percent over 100 like we did over here, and then simplify that fraction. And so that's a way to turn your percent into a fraction. Then you can do whatever operation or calculation you want with it. Alright guys, I hope this gave you the groundwork you needed in order to know that you're ready for you have the background skills necessary to be successful.